A huge crowd at the Goldfields Raceway between Welkom and Oudendaalsrus. Some typical midwinter Free State scenery with a parched landscape. Put it all together, and what do you get? It had to be rounds 9 and 10 of the Bankfin Touring Car Championship. With the season at the halfway mark, the trip to the Free State was important for all the factory and privateer teams. Some needed to consolidate on good starts to the season, while others needed to make up for lost ground, and it added up to some high stakes on offer. Sitting pretty at the top of the championship log when the Bankfin brigade arrived in Welkom was reigning champion Janelle de Villiers. De Villiers led BP Nissan teammate Duncan Vos by 26 points, with NJ and Audi pair Terry Moss and Chris Aberdeen next up. Sean van der Linde completed the top 5, but was only 2 points ahead of Marco de Santos, who led the privateer championship. For his part, de Santos was under a little pressure from British driver Mark Peters, with just 2 points separating the pair. When Bankfin touring car clerk of the course Steve Harding opened pit lane for the first qualifying session, it heralded some strange behaviour from teams and drivers. With hefty mass penalties slapped on the first 4 cars in qualifying, teams were a little loath to go out and take on the timing system operated by Johannesburg company Telsus. The atmosphere in the pits was almost jolly as a cat-and-mouse game unfolded.
Well, it's not often one would not want to qualify on pole position, but due to the increased weight penalty for being on pole, we have to really look at this seriously. So we tested here quite a lot in depth, with and without the weight, and we came up with a solution where we felt we needed to be 5th, ideally, or 3rd, to have a good chance to win, which is not a normal situation, but the weight coupled to the high tyre wear here at Welkom forced us into this position.
For former South African champion and Daytona winner Tony Martin, it all represented a somewhat strange comeback to racing after a 5-year hiatus.
Well, my cousin Brian Martin has been given Hilton Cowie's Toyota car to drive, and they needed extra in the field, and he asked me if I'd like to have a ride, which I said I'd love to. This formula they've got is a good formula. I think the car's very nice. I'm a bit rusty. I went out twice yesterday and once this morning. I felt a lot better in the car this morning, but we've now picked up a minor misfire, which has brought our development to a standstill.
Also kicking his heels was Minolta Toyota factory driver Hilton Cowie.
The Minolta Toyota guys have done a fantastic job with the new car, but our supply in England with the gearbox has let us down, and the gearbox has only arrived this morning, and they're busy being assembled in Johannesburg right now as we speak. So we're hoping to have them here this afternoon so we can do a couple of laps tonight.
The battle of the reluctant pole setters was finally resolved by NJ and Audi pair Chris Aberdeen and Anthony Taylor, who shared the front row. They were followed by privateer Marco de Santos and Terry Moss in the 3rd NJ and Audi. We asked Chris Aberdeen how the team was going to handle the weight penalties.
We're going to place the weight over our right rear wheel, and I think it's going to make a big difference. The only right-handers on the circuit, and I'm hoping that it's going to work for us. We've taken a chance. We're going to take the weight penalty, and hopefully it'll work. I don't know. It's a chance, but we're taking it.
Audi pair Chris Aberdeen and Anthony Taylor led the charge at the green light from the clerk of the course Steve Harding with a lap 1 danger point at Goldfields, the S's. True to form, there was early drama with contact between Marco de Santos and Taylor. A sideways Taylor took to the dirt with de Santos slewing off the circuit in the face of oncoming traffic. It was a little hectic in midfield with Hilton Cowie in the Minolta Toyota Corolla given a nudge by George Besaidnout, but the Cape Town driver found himself up into 6th place in a car that ran for the first time in the morning warm-up session. With a Toyota Celica motor coupled to a Hewland gearbox housed in a Toyota Camry, casing the new Minolta Toyota Corolla is something of a hybrid, with Cowie chasing after the Hillback Nissan Sentra of Nico van Rensburg down the 1K long Tony Viana straight. And just watch carefully how the strip stream is perfectly judged and used to perfection. Despite his moment at the S's, Anthony Taylor held on to 2nd, but charging through the field with the 2 BP Nissan Primeras. Janelle de Villiers was already 4th when Nico van Rensburg got it all wrong under braking at Castrol. Contact between Nissan and Sassel BMW saw van Rensburg and a mighty unhappy Mike Briggs disappear into the fauna and flora. An action replay now of the S's incident. Terry Moss in the engine Audi was the driver with a bird's eye view as Taylor and de Santos had their coming together. Life then got a little more exciting for de Santos, and there's always an eerie silence after an accident. De Santos was soon mobile again, but with a broken rear suspension, he wasn't going anywhere, at least not in a hurry. Down at Castor Corner, a grim-looking Mike Briggs was climbing out of the Sassel BMW, with Nico van Rensburg later excluded from the results for his role in the demise of the Sassel Beamer. While Briggs faced a long walk back to the pits, Chris Aberdeen was trying to put as much distance as quickly as possible between himself and teammate Anthony Taylor and the rest of the chasing pack. Janelle de Villiers had found a way past Terry Moss in the third engine Audi and was now third after starting from 10th back there on the grid. Sean van der Linde was chasing Moss, who was losing ground to de Villiers down the long straight, with slipstreaming as an essential part of a driver's armoury. De Villiers was closing in on Anthony Taylor with Audi, Nissan Primeras, Audi and BMW line astern under braking at Castor Corner. That long straight stringing the cars out. But no one was close enough to try any heroics at Castro, but the four-car train behind race leader Chris Aberdeen was fraught with possibilities, with 3 touring car champions right in the bunch. Aberdeen caught a pits-bound Marco de Santos at the subway complex, with Taylor now under some serious pressure from Janelle de Villiers. Terry Moss and Sean van der Linde in the remaining Sassel BMW were right there, and it was obvious that Taylor was holding up de Villiers. The big question now was whether or not Taylor could continue to hold off de Villiers, and where the reigning Bankfin champion would choose to make a move on the young Krugersdorp driver. Taylor won a factory drive with the engine Audi squad after 2 Sterling drives in round 7 and 8 at AA Kyalami, but the Audi looked to be struggling just a little. From a de Villiers perspective, he needed to get past Taylor as quickly as possible so that he could set sail after Aberdeen, who was threatening to run away with matters in race 1. Down the pit straight, 1994 touring car champion Sean van der Linde decided he'd had enough of sitting behind 96 champ Terry Moss and gradually pulled alongside the engine Audi. By the time they hit the S's, Moss had no option but to tuck in behind van der Linde, with a Sassel BMW looking menacing in 4th place. Exit from the Saybat sweep and onto the Viana straight, with both Janelle de Villiers and Sean van der Linde in perfect slipstream positions. Race cam action from the van der Linde Sassel BMW, and an armchair view as first de Villiers and then van der Linde used the slipstream to simply sail past Taylor. There was nothing Taylor could do about it, and de Villiers and van der Linde brought Moss along with them, and he fancied his chances of diving underneath Taylor at Castor Corner. This little battle was hotting up. Marco de Santos had finally made it back to the pits with some hard work ahead of the Duckham's Midas technical crew before the start of round 10 of the Bankfin series. Half distance and Janelle de Villiers in the BP Nissan Primera closed right up on race leader Chris Aberdeen in the engine Audi. De Villiers had brought with him Sean van der Linde in the Sassel Beamer, and Aberdeen was now under pressure on 2 fronts. Down the long Viana straight, Aberdeen was weaving across the circuit to try and break the slipstream, but it made no difference. The extra 75 kilograms of mass that went with pole position were proving too much for the engine Audi. De Villiers went sailing past Aberdeen on the approach to Castor Corner, but still had lots of work to do. Aberdeen was perfectly entitled to take a defensive line into the right-hander, but de Villiers decided to simply drive around the outside of the Audi. The reigning champion was into the lead, and the BP Nissan stalling tactics in the opening qualifying session were starting to pay dividends. From an Aberdeen perspective, the early lead he had built up was not enough, and the Cape Town-based helicopter company owner now had to worry about Sean van der Linde, who was still looking strong in the Sassel BMW and looking for his first win of the season. Further back, an interesting duel had developed between Hilton Cowie in the Minolta Toyota Corolla and privateer George Besaidnout in the Nissan Engine Exchange Centra. Former South African champion Tony Martin was circulating steadily in the dealer team Toyota Corolla, but most of the celebrating was reserved for the BP Nissan pits, and there was a huge cheer from the team when de Villiers appeared on the pit straight ahead of Aberdeen. Behind de Villiers, Aberdeen and van der Linde, there was a second wave of cars that included Duncan Voss, Terry Moss, Anthony Taylor and the leading privateer Mark Peters and the Duxbury Modems BMW. But the focus now was on van der Linde and Aberdeen. Van der Linde started from the back of the grid, and like de Villiers was not carrying a mass penalty. That gave him a big advantage over Aberdeen, and it looked to be a matter of time before the Sassel BMW also went ahead of the luxurious engine Audi driver. Hilton Cowie in the ailing Minolta Toyota Corolla that refused to stay in gear was keeping his nose ahead of Besaidnout, with Tony Martin in his first Bankfin touring car outing chasing after the pair. Back with the leaders in a game, Aberdeen was still managing to hold off van der Linde. De Villiers was creeping away from the pair, and van der Linde needed to quickly find a way around the engine Audi if he was to put some pressure on de Villiers. Behind the leading trio, there was pressure for Duncan Voss, who had the 1996 champion Terry Moss right on his tail. This was developing into an interesting little cameo, but the main focus was still on the Aberdeen-Van der Linde battle. Like all circuits, Goldfields Raceway has prime overtaking areas where it's simply a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Overtaking at other points of the circuit offers a fair degree of risk value, but Van der Linde was climbing all over Aberdeen, and it was a case of the Satchel BMW driver choosing his spot to finally put the squeeze on the engine Audi. Aberdeen was having to take defensive lines through corners, and there was no doubt he was holding up Van der Linde. When the decisive move came, it was at the entrance to the pit straight, with Van der Linde having the momentum out of the right-hander to get alongside Aberdeen. It was now just a question of who had the straight line speed to get to the S's first, and with no extra mass, the Satchel BMW had the legs on the engine Audi. Race order was now De Villiers, Van der Linde and Aberdeen, and it looked as though there would be no way back for Aberdeen. The penultimate lap with a daylight now between De Villiers and Van der Linde and the Satchel BMW and Aberdeen and the engine Audi. Aberdeen now faced another potential problem. Teammate Terry Moss had got past Duncan Foss in the second BP Nissan Primera, and there was never any question that the ever-aggressive Moss would throw everything into a late charge to catch Aberdeen. De Villiers looked to be in complete control. Van der Linde was sliding all over the circuit in the Satchel Beamer, and Moss, with Duncan Foss in tow, was creeping up on Aberdeen. With a lap and a bit to go, the odds were stacked against Moss catching Aberdeen, but you could bet your bottom dollar he was going to do everything to try. Race order going into the last lap saw De Villiers ahead of Van der Linde and Aberdeen. Then came Moss and Foss, Anthony Taylor in the third engine Audi, and the ever-consistent Mark Peters in the Duxbury Modens BMW was once again the leading privateer. The leaders were in amongst the back markers while a run of dreadful luck continued for Hilton Cowie and the Minolta Toyota Corolla team. Cowie was in the pits with terminal gearbox failure, and his work for the day was over. Race leader Janil de Villiers was into the subway complex for the last time, with win number 5 for the season firmly in his grasp. The Van der Linde Satchel BMW was still sliding all over the place, but it was an encouraging showing for the former champion. De Villiers was flying up front, but through the infield section, Van der Linde once again had the BMW sliding around, but now he had a handy margin over Aberdeen, who was in no real danger of being caught by Terry Moss. A little gap had opened up between Moss and Foss, but it was all academic at this stage of proceedings. The checkered flag for Janil de Villiers with a strong second place for Sean van der Linde. Chris Aberdeen also found himself on the podium and was followed home by Terry Moss, Duncan Foss, Anthony Taylor and leading privateer Mark Peters. For the BP Nissan team, victory vindicated their qualifying tactics.
It was a different sort of a race weekend than other race weekends. We had a big tyre problem here. I think all the guys had the tyre problem, so it was tricky you had to be at the end there to win the race. But so that's why we decided to qualify last, and we wouldn't carry any weight then because the guy on pole carried 75 kilograms, and we just thought that it was a bit much for us to finish the race well.
Champagne 2 for privateers Mark Peters, George Besaidnout and Brian Martin, who led home the privateers. Sanity returned to proceedings. Aberdeen was once again in pole position, but this time the likes of Janil de Villiers, Duncan Foss and Sean van der Linde were up where you would expect them to be. Marco de Santos was again quickest of the privateers, and this time it was the engine Audi pair of Terry Moss and Anthony Taylor who would start from the back of the grid. Of the first race casualties, Mike Briggs and de Santos were back in action, but Hilton Cowie was missing in the Minolta Toyota Corolla. Poleman Chris Aberdeen controls the speed at the start of round 10 as they wait for the green light. A clean start this time around, and there were no funnies at the S's. Pole sitter Chris Aberdeen outdragged Janil de Villiers into the S's to jump into the early lead, with the rest of the field filing through the long sabre sweep in line astern. From the back of the grid, Anthony Taylor and Terry Moss and the engine Audis had picked up a handful of places, and young Taylor found himself behind the Duxbury Modens BMW, driven by Mark Peters, with slipstreaming the name of the game as the field charged down towards Castor Corner at well over 200 kilometers an hour. Into the braking area at Castrol, with Janil de Villiers taking over the lead from Chris Aberdeen. Sean van der Linde, Duncan Foss, Marco de Santos and Mike Briggs were right there with Peters still ahead of Anthony Taylor as they streamed towards the subway section of the circuit. Race order was de Villiers ahead of Aberdeen, van der Linde, Foss, de Santos, Briggs and Taylor, who moved ahead of Peters at the subway. With no early incidents at the early race, danger points at the S's and down at Castor Corner, the field was closely bunched with the makings of a terrific race. Through the infield sections of Goldfields Raceway, Van der Linde was climbing all over Chris Aberdeen. This was a repeat of round 9, with de Villiers ahead of Aberdeen and Van der Linde trying to find a way past the engine Audi. But there wasn't one that time. The door firmly closed in his face. The charge of the Bankfin touring car brigade down the pit straight at Goldfields Raceway, with early evidence of good battles at the front of the field and amongst a band of privateers running behind factory entries. Of the privateers, Marco de Santos was again up with the lead factory cars. The Duckham's Midas Nissan Centre was running fifth behind de Villiers, Aberdeen, Van der Linde and Voss. Tucked in behind de Santos and Mike Briggs, who had Anthony Taylor, the engine Audi swimming all over the back of the Sassel BMW. Terrific race cam action from the Taylor engine Audi, and an armchair view of what slipstreaming at more than 200 km an hour is really all about. Trust us folks, this takes some nerve. Castor corner and no heroics from the lead cars. There was pressure for Sean van der Linde from Duncan Voss and Marco de Santos, who was under attack from Mike Briggs, but they kept station through Castor and on the run to the subway section. Tyre wear was likely to play a role late in the race, with all the drivers trying to conserve rubber. Sean van der Linde was sliding the Sassel BMW all over the place in round 9, but in theory the rear-wheel drive Beamers should be easier on rubber than the front-wheel drive entries. But in motor racing, theory does not always work in practice, and the situation out on the circuit was still very fluid. First bit of drama on the second race was when Aberdeen took a very tight line for the right-hander onto the pit straight, and first Sean van der Linde and then Duncan Voss took advantage of added momentum out of the corner to bomb their way past the engine Audi. Race order was now de Villiers ahead of Van der Linde, Voss and Aberdeen, with his mistake at the last corner costing the engine Audi driver 2 places. De Santos was still fifth, but coming under increasing pressure from Mike Briggs and Anthony Taylor. The halfway mark, and Gilles de Villiers and Sean van der Linde had broken away from Duncan Voss. There was another little gap between Voss and Aberdeen, who had Mike Briggs closing in on him. Behind Briggs, a hard-charging Terry Moss had moved ahead of a closely bunched threesome that included Anthony Taylor in the third engine Audi and privateers Marco de Santos and Mark Peters and the Dugsby Modems BMW. This little battle had the makings of a terrific scrap, with high stakes for de Santos and Peters, who were neck and neck at the top of the Privateers Championship. His non-finish in round 9 hurt de Santos in this respect, and he desperately needed to finish ahead of the British driver this time around. In another battle of the privateers, Nico van Rensburg in the Hillbank Nissan Centre was being chased by the dealer team Toyota pair of Brian and Tony Martin. George Besaidnout in the Nissan Sentra and Garth Waberski in the DAW WAP Toyota Camry. The Martins and Besaidnout were slowly hauling in Van Rensburg, with younger Waberski also making up ground all the time. Lap 9, and matters were getting interesting at the front of the field again. Sean van der Linde was challenging strongly for the lead, but was squeezed out at Castrol Corner. Going around the outside at Castrol gave van der Linde the inside line for the subway complex, and he sneaked up on Gilles de Villiers, who brought with him none other than Duncan Voss. Both Van der Linde and Voss went past de Villiers at the left-hander into the tricky subway complex, and now the cat was really amongst the pigeons, with a three-way fight going on for the lead. The move that Voss pulled on teammate de Villiers was an indication that there were no team orders in the BP Nissan camp. It was a case of every man for himself, and a huge cheer went up from the crowd packed onto the infield section at Goldfields Raceway when Van der Linde came into view ahead of the 2 BP Nissan Primeros. The hectic battle going on amongst the privateers at the back of the field was still in full swing. Tony Martin had moved ahead of cousin Brian, with George Besaidnout and Garth Waberski in close attendance. The Waberski pit crew won a race against time to get their man out onto the circuit in the Toyota Camry, with the quartet chasing after Nico van Rensburg and making inroads into the lead held by the Hillbank Nissan Sentra. It was close racing, and every bit as competitive as the struggle going on at the front of the field. That's where race leader Sean van der Linde had his hands full with the BP Nissan pair of Duncan Voss and Gilles de Villiers. A little nudge from Voss at Castor Corner was a reminder for Van der Linde that he was under severe pressure. There was a little aside to this battle, with victory for de Villiers in round 9, moving him ahead of Van der Linde in the touring car statistics department. The win in round 9 gave de Villiers his 17th career win, 1 ahead of Van der Linde and 10 behind leader Mike Briggs, who has 27 wins to his name. battle for the lead, and a great scrap amongst the privateers was keeping interest alive right to the death. Nico van Rensburg and the Martins and company were a long way behind leading privateers Marco de Santos and Mark Peters, but it was still hectic stuff, with the Martin cousins constantly swapping positions as they chased after van Rensburg, who had his problems in round 9 and was excluded from the results. The 5 cars in this group were closely bunched, and ahead of them, a great battle was also going on between Chris Aberdeen, Mike Briggs and Terry Moss, who stole a march on Briggs as the trio hit the pit straight. As always, the Audi teammates demonstrated that there were definitely no team orders involved in this squad. This is called going at it hammer and tongs. Race leader Van der Linde, Vos and de Villiers were in the save-at sweep when the second wave of cars arrived at the S's, with Moss bouncing off the curbs as he muscled his way past Aberdeen to move into 4th. Obviously, there were no team orders in the engine Audi team. Castor corner, and this time Sean van der Linde had a little breathing space. He was far enough ahead of Duncan Vos to preclude the BP Nissan driver from chancing his arm under braking at Castor. De Villiers was in the same boat as his teammate, and the 2 BP Nissan Primero drivers had no option but to slot in behind the Sassel BMW. It was noticeable that this time around the BMW was not sliding around as much as was the case in round 9, and with race distance rapidly running out, it was advantage van der Linde with a maiden win this season in his grasp. But was he going to hang on? Of privateers arriving almost simultaneously at Castor Corner also kept station. Brian Martin was now ahead of cousin Tony Besaidnout and Wabashki, with the quartet still closing in on Nico van Rensburg in the Hillbank Nissan Sentra. Anything was likely to happen with this bunch was concerned, while up ahead of them, the little scrap between Moss and Briggs also held late possibilities for drama. The pair had moved ahead of a struggling Chris Aberdeen, who was being caught by engine Audi teammate Anthony Taylor. Behind Taylor, the other battle of the privateers, that between Marco de Santos and Mark Peters, was also in full swing and heading for a late climax. The always aggressive Terry Moss was looking a little ragged as he battled to stay ahead of Mike Briggs in the second Sassel Beamer, but it was typical Moss, with the Port Elizabeth farmer as spectacular as ever. After holding off the pack of cars behind him for most of the race, there were now serious problems for Nico van Rensburg along the pit straight. Brian and Tony Martin, George Besaidnout and Garth Wabashki had finally caught up with van Rensburg, who was in for a hectic last lap. The race leaders were already halfway through their final lap, with Sean van der Linde still fending off Duncan Vos and Janelle de Villiers. The 3 cars were tied together, with de Villiers applying some serious pressure on teammate Vos. De Villiers was right with Vos through the infield section, with a right-hander onto the pit straight, his best chance of a desperate last-minute overtaking manoeuvre. Neither Nissan was going to stop van der Linde from grabbing his and BMW's first win of the season, but a little mistake at the final corner enabled Janelle de Villiers to sneak up on Duncan Vos and snatch second place. A late charge carried Mike Briggs into 4th place ahead of Terry Moss, Aberdeen and Taylor, with Marco de Santos managing to fend off Mark Peters to finish the leading privateer. Van der Linde was happy to see the bad run end.
Gone through a bad patch the last couple of races, non-finishes, bad finishes, and I think today this is what the team needed for good morale and for good team spirit, and I devote this to the team.
Happiness in the BMW team.
BMW worked very hard at getting the car more competitive, and that's definitely showing through. Sean had a very good result here, and those are flowing down to my car.
Plenty of bubbly on the privateers podium, and after 10 rounds of the Bankfin Touring Car Series, a massive lead for Nissan in the Manufacturers' Championship. They lead Audi by 117 points, with BMW in 3rd.